is the third lecture for biodiversity and conservation. So the first video, I discussed the origins of biodiversity, referring to evolution through the process of natural selection. The second video discussed the importance of biodiversity, meaning how it can serve humans and how it contributes to our standard of living. Now, this third video, as you can see, is focused on threats to biodiversity. So your learning objectives include naming two factors creating the threats to biodiversity. So there are numerous threats, but there are two main processes or two main factors that are leading to those threats. You need to be able to describe the main threats to biodiversity provided in a video that I've given you and your textbook. And you also need to be able to provide an example of each. So there are two main factors that are leading to biodiversity losses, and those factors are human population growth and overconsumption. Now, human population growth, our population has been growing exponentially ever since around the Industrial Revolution, meaning that we are using more and more resources, and we're not using them in a way that allows them to be maintained or replaced. Also, overconsumption. Now, this is a huge issue in developed countries. In the US, we have one of the highest consumption rates in the world. So there have been mass extinctions, 5 mass extinctions that have occurred naturally throughout geologic history. Now, first of all, a mass extinction means that there are 75% or more of the world's species being lost. And this is in a short amount of time with respect to geologic time, so less than 2.8 million years. So you've probably all heard of the extinction of the dinosaurs, which happened when an asteroid struck the Earth. It caused severe changes in temperature. But there have been 4 other mass extinctions, and these have all had to do with climate. Either the temperature changed, like the cooling of the climate, or we had less oxygen and more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So these things have all affected organisms on Earth. Now, humans are currently causing what many have called the 6th mass extinction. Now, we haven't lost 75% of the world's species yet, but we are definitely on that path. So let's talk about some of the things that are causing the extinctions. Now, this is a really good video with David Attenborough. And in the video, there are, I believe it's about 5 causes to biodiversity loss that are discussed, including examples. So I'm going to have you watch this video on your own, but it is very important that you do watch it and take notes. So habitat loss is the leading cause of biodiversity loss at this point. Now, that is going to be replaced by global climate change, most likely in the coming years. But right now, habitat loss is one of the biggest issues. And habitat loss is mostly occurring because of humans. So agriculture, that is one of the things driving the loss of tropical rainforests, agriculture, and also raising cattle. So here in the picture, you can see orangutans in Indonesia. Now, this was actually a fire, but it was caused by land clearing, slash and burn agriculture, where you cut down and burn the vegetation so that you can then put crops on the land. The growing human population is a threat and causes habitat loss as we build more and larger cities. Urbanization is what it is called. Climate change, now this is human caused as well. And it is causing habitat loss because it is changing the vegetation communities. So for instance, areas that are lush with vegetation, once the temperature increases, a lot of that will die off and maybe it's replaced by grasslands or desert. So there is a lot of habitat loss associated with an overall average increase in temperature. And then also water use. Water use is a huge issue. It will be one of the most pressing issues that the human population will face in the coming years, in addition to global climate change. Wars are already being fought over water. There is a city in South Africa, I believe it's Cape Town, they ran out of water, all of their water gone. And so people are limited to very short showers because water is being trucked in from other areas. Bottled water has to be handed out. It's been very expensive and has severely limited the water availability for people living in that area. Now, with regards to habitat loss, we are using water that maintains certain ecosystems. Like think of Florida. We have drained so many of the swamp areas, and those are very diverse ecosystems. Now, over-harvesting, you are probably familiar with. So we think of over-harvesting mostly in relation to harvesting animals for food. So I put a picture here. All of those fish are being hauled in with a net and a process that we call bottom trawling. So they drop a net, it has weights, it goes to the bottom of the ocean, and then they drag the net along the bottom of the ocean, collecting all of the fish that are in that area. So what you're looking at here is a coral reef before trawling and after trawling. So it devastates the ecosystem, the ocean ecosystem. Now, also, if you look at the picture, look at how many fish are in that net, immense amounts of fish. Now, I put a video here, and it's interesting because I actually wasn't very familiar with this process, but that more and more people are relying on bomb fishing, where you throw dynamite into the water and then collect the either shocked or dead fish that come to the surface. So I put a video for you on here, and I'd like you to watch it so that you are familiar with the process. Now, overharvesting is not necessarily new to the human population. This is a picture of a passenger pigeon, which you may have heard of. So in the late 1700s and early 1800s, there were so many passenger pigeons that when flocks flew overhead, it darkened the sky. I mean, 3 to 5 billion birds. Now, apparently people liked eating passenger pigeons. They were hunted into extinction. The last passenger pigeon was shot by a hunter in March in the year 1900. So that is a species that played an important part in the ecosystem that we will never get back. Now, another huge issue that is causing losses in biodiversity are invasive species. So first of all, an invasive species is an organism, as I wrote here, that causes ecological or environmental harm in an area where it is not native. Okay, so when I had to do that project with iNaturalist, we talked about whether plants were native or non-native. And native means that they originated and evolved in the area that they are located. So we have plants that have always been in the Sonoran Desert. Those are native. Now, invasive organisms, plants and animals, have many things in common, but they are very good at competing with native species. They outcompete. your native species for habitat, or they like eat all of the native species. They can spread disease. So there are also what we call weedy species, and that's where the word weed comes from. But here's an example of an animal that has caused a lot of problem. So in Australia, the cane toad was introduced to eat cane beetles, beetles that are eating the sugarcane crops. Now, the problem is that the beetle larva is underground. And as soon as the beetle emerges, it flies into the upper parts of the sugarcane field. And so the cane toads never even see the beetle or are never able to eat it. However, cane toads that are really big, they've decimated populations of natural reptiles, native reptiles. They eat birds and bird eggs, they eat small rodents, and they also excrete a poison. So if larger animals try to prey on them, it kills them. This is an example of an invasive species. Now, I put pictures of 2 invasive species here in Arizona that you've probably seen. So this plant on the top, we call it stinknet. It's also called globe chamomile. Now, it's originally from South Africa, but you can see it everywhere in people's yards, in the desert, and it is out competing our native vegetation. It's taking up a lot of water, taking up a lot of area, and it reproduces and spreads very easily. And on the bottom here, we have a crayfish. So Arizona has no native crayfish species, but you will find these crayfish everywhere you go. If you look in a creek or the lake, there's crayfish. And these are, like I said, they're non-native, and they were originally introduced for sport fishing. Now, I mentioned climate change. Obviously, we've all heard of climate change. Now, I wanted to put the most recent data here. The global average temperature has increased by 2 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. Now, keep in mind, this is global average. So if you were to average all the temperatures that the different regions of Earth experience, this is the average. So why is climate change causing losses in biodiversity? Well, the habitats are becoming warmer on average. And so there are many organisms that cannot live in these warmer temperatures. Now, some of these organisms are able to move to more northern habitats or, higher elevation, but a lot of organisms are not able to do that. Take trees, for instance. Trees can expand habitat, right? Seeds are dispersed further out, but it's a very, very slow process. And so we are going to lose a lot of our forests and tree species due to global warming. Now, the next thing I put, important seasonal shifts of resources. I always think of bees when I think of seasonal shifts. So bees, the pupae, right, are in the ground. And an adult bee emerges when the flowers that it feeds on start to bloom. Now, this is regulated by temperature, precipitation. There's a way that bees know, okay, I'm going to come out of the ground now and start foraging because the plants I rely on are present. Now, with a change in temperature, it's out of sync. The insects are emerging, the bees are emerging, but the flowers are dying off or blooming at a different time. And so they do not have a food source like they would normally. Now, that was a very quick lecture video on threats to biodiversity. So I urge you to watch the videos that I included in my presentation and to read your textbook. My next lecture video will be on the preservation of biodiversity.